He thought throwing her out would end her story, but in that moment, he had unknowingly evicted the one person who owned everything he stood on. The chandelier above the Carter estate shimmered with quiet authority, casting golden reflections across polished marble floors that had seen decades of power, legacy, and control. Yet that night, something subtle had shifted beneath its glow, something no one in that room could quite name, not yet. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or state in the comments below, and if you believe respect should never be based on appearances, stay with this story, because what happened next changed everything. Emily Carter stood near the edge of the grand living room, her presence almost blending into the background, dressed in a simple cream blouse and modest skirt that contrasted sharply with the tailored suits and designer gowns surrounding her, her hands folded gently in front of her as voices swirled past her like she was invisible, which, in many ways, she had become. To the Carter family, she wasn't a partner, not truly. She was an attachment, a quiet addition to Daniel Carter's life, one they tolerated but never fully accepted. Victoria Carter, poised and immaculately dressed, surveyed the room with a gaze that measured worth in appearances alone, her lips tightening ever so slightly each time her eyes landed on Emily, as though the younger woman's simplicity disrupted the carefully curated image she had spent years building. It wasn't just one moment, not one insult that defined the tension in that house. It was the accumulation, the small dismissive glances, the subtle shifts in conversation when Emily spoke, the way chairs were filled before anyone thought to offer her a seat, the way her presence was acknowledged only when it became inconvenient to ignore. Lucas Carter leaned against the bar, swirling a glass of amber liquid, his smirk barely concealed as he watched Emily from across the room, amusement flickering in his eyes, the kind that came from certainty, from believing you understood exactly who someone was, and more importantly, what they were not. They all thought they knew her. They thought her silence meant weakness, her calm meant ignorance, her restraint meant she had nothing to say. But there was something about Emily that didn't fit their narrative, something in the way her eyes remained steady, even when the room subtly closed in around her, something in the way she never rushed to defend herself, never scrambled to prove her worth, as if she was waiting, not for acceptance, but for something else entirely. The music played softly in the background, laughter echoing off high ceilings, glasses clinking in celebration of deals and alliances. But beneath it all, there was a quiet tension building, invisible yet undeniable, like the air before a storm that no one believed would arrive. And standing in the center of it all, unnoticed and underestimated, was the one person who didn't need to belong to that house, because whether they realized it or not, that house already belonged to her. The evening unfolded with the kind of polished perfection that only the Carter family could orchestrate, every detail meticulously arranged to reinforce their image of control and prestige. Yet beneath the surface, the fractures were beginning to show in ways only a careful observer would notice, and Emily noticed everything. Victoria moved through the room like a queen inspecting her court, offering tight smiles and calculated compliments, her voice smooth but edged with quiet superiority, making sure every guest understood exactly who held authority in that house, and more importantly, who did not. When she approached Emily, the shift in tone was almost imperceptible to outsiders but unmistakable to those paying attention, her words polite but hollow, her gaze lingering just long enough to signal disapproval before moving on as if Emily were an afterthought. Lucas, on the other hand, made no effort to hide his disdain, his comments drifting just loud enough to be overheard, remarks about standards, about appearances, about how certain people simply did not fit into environments built on success. Each sentence carefully crafted to humiliate without direct confrontation. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension but choosing silence, because in rooms like this, comfort always sided with power. Emily remained still, her posture composed, her expression calm in a way that seemed almost out of place amid the subtle hostility surrounding her, and that calm unsettled them more than any argument ever could. She did not defend herself, did not interrupt, did not react in the way they expected, and that absence of reaction created a quiet discomfort that lingered in the air like a question no one dared to ask. Daniel was nowhere to be seen, delayed by business across the country, leaving Emily alone to navigate a space that had never truly welcomed her, and the absence of his presence seemed to embolden the others, as though without him, the last thin layer of restraint had been lifted. The music swelled slightly as a new group of guests entered, laughter rising again, but it carried a sharper edge now, a sense that something was building, something inevitable. Victoria clinked her glass lightly, drawing attention as conversations softened and heads turned toward her, her smile returning, practiced and flawless, as she began to speak about family legacy, about standards, about the importance of preserving what had been built over generations. Her eyes drifted to Emily once more, and this time, the message was clear, deliberate, and public. Some people, she said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough to reach every corner of the room, do not understand what it means to belong to a family like this. They mistake proximity for acceptance. A few quiet chuckles followed, cautious but present, and Lucas added with a smirk. And sometimes they need to be reminded. The room did not erupt, but it shifted, attention narrowing, curiosity sharpening, the invisible line drawn more clearly than ever before. Emily felt the weight of every gaze, every assumption, every judgment pressing toward her, but her eyes remained steady, her breathing even, as if she had already lived through this moment before, as if she knew something the rest of them did not. And somewhere beneath the polished surface of that gathering, beneath the laughter and the carefully constructed hierarchy, a realization was slowly approaching, one that would soon leave that entire room without a single word to say. The silence that followed Victoria's words did not feel accidental. It felt engineered, as if the entire evening had been building toward this precise moment, and now that it had arrived, no one quite knew how far it would go. Emily did not lower her gaze, did not shift uncomfortably, did not offer the apology that so many in that room expected. Instead, she simply stood there, composed, her expression unreadable in a way that made the air feel heavier, more uncertain. Victoria tilted her head slightly, studying her, as though waiting for a reaction that never came, and that absence began to irritate her more than any defiance could have. Lucas stepped forward then, his confidence fueled by the quiet support of the room, his voice carrying a sharper edge now, no longer disguised as humor. "You have been here long enough to understand how things work," he said, his tone measured but firm. "And yet you continue to carry yourself as though expectations do not apply to you." A few guests shifted their weight, their eyes darting between them, sensing that the line between subtle insult and open confrontation had just been crossed. Emily's hands remained folded, her posture unchanged, but there was something in the stillness of her presence that felt deliberate now, like the calm center of something much larger waiting to unfold. Victoria took a slow step forward, reclaiming control of the moment, her voice lowering just enough to draw everyone closer, to make them listen. "This family is built on standards," she said, each word precise, "on discipline, on understanding one's place. And when someone refuses to respect that, it becomes a problem." The implication did not need to be stated directly. It was already understood by everyone in the room. Lucas exhaled a short, almost amused breath before adding, "And problems need to be addressed." The room grew quieter still, the soft music now distant, almost irrelevant, as the focus narrowed completely onto Emily. For a brief second, it seemed as though time itself had slowed, as if even the house was waiting. Then Victoria made the decision that would change everything. "You are not suited for this family," she said plainly, her voice no longer softened for appearances, "and it would be best for everyone if you left." The words landed with a finality that echoed far beyond their simplicity, a public dismissal, unmistakable and absolute. A few guests looked down, others watched more intently, curiosity overtaking discomfort, because moments like this were rare, and people always wanted to see how they ended. Lucas stepped closer, gesturing toward the grand entrance with a casual authority that suggested the decision had already been made. "You heard her," he said, his tone firm. "This is not your place." And then came the line that sealed it, spoken with complete certainty, the kind that only comes from believing you hold all the power. "This is our house." The words lingered in the air, heavy, definitive, unquestioned by anyone except the one person they were directed at. Emily finally moved, but not in the way they expected. She did not argue, did not plead, did not hesitate. She lifted her gaze slightly, meeting theirs with a calm that felt almost out of place in the tension of the moment. "You are right," she said quietly, her voice steady, clear enough to carry across the silent room. "It is not yours." For a fraction of a second, no one reacted, as if the meaning had not fully registered yet, as if the room itself needed time to catch up. Then she turned, her steps measured and unhurried, and walked toward the door without looking back, leaving behind a silence that no one in that house would be able to forget. The door closed behind Emily with a soft, almost unremarkable click, yet the sound echoed through the grand hall in a way that lingered longer than any raised voice could have. And for a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the house itself had registered something that the people inside had not yet fully understood. Victoria exhaled slowly, smoothing the front of her dress with composed precision, her posture straightening as she turned back toward the guests, reclaiming the room with a practiced smile that suggested control had been restored, even though a subtle tension still clung to the air like a question left unanswered. "Now," she said lightly, lifting her glass as if nothing significant had occurred, "where were we?" A few hesitant laughs followed, scattered and uncertain, as conversations attempted to resume, but the rhythm had changed. Something intangible had shifted beneath the surface, and no amount of polished charm could fully erase it. Lucas poured himself another drink, his movements sharper than before, his earlier confidence still present, but now edged with something less certain, something he could not quite name, and he found himself replaying Emily's final words in his mind, not the tone, but the meaning, the quiet certainty behind them that did not match the situation as he understood it. "It is not yours." The phrase lingered, subtle but persistent, like a detail that refused to be dismissed. Across the room, a few guests exchanged glances, their curiosity no longer hidden, their interest shifting from casual observation to quiet speculation, because while they had witnessed dismissals before, there had been something different about this one, something that did not resolve cleanly. Victoria noticed it too, the way attention did not fully return to her, the way conversations felt forced, and for the first time that evening, a faint flicker of irritation crossed her expression before she quickly masked it, unwilling to allow even the smallest crack in her control. "She will adjust," she said under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else, as if reducing Emily to a passing inconvenience would restore the balance she was accustomed to. Lucas nodded, though his agreement lacked conviction, his eyes drifting briefly toward the entrance where Emily had disappeared, as if expecting something, though he could not say what. Outside, the night air was cool and still, the estate's long driveway stretching into darkness, lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and subtle lighting that guided the path forward, and Emily walked it without hesitation, her steps steady, her expression unchanged, as though she had simply reached the end of something that had already been decided long before this night began. She did not look back at the towering structure behind her, did not pause, did not falter, because whatever connection had once tied her to that house had just been severed in a way that left no room for doubt. Yet there was no urgency in her movement, no trace of defeat, only a quiet resolve that seemed to settle deeper with each step she took, as if the moment they believed they had removed her had instead set something else in motion. Inside, the music played on, softer now, almost distant, and the Carter family resumed their roles, their conversations, their carefully maintained image, unaware that the decision made in that room had already begun to reshape everything they thought they controlled, and by morning, the truth they had dismissed would arrive at their door, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet authority that could not be ignored, and when it did, the silence that followed would not be so easily filled. Morning arrived at the Carter estate with the same quiet elegance it always carried, sunlight stretching across the marble floors, illuminating every polished surface as though nothing had changed, as though the events of the previous night had already been absorbed and erased by routine. But beneath that calm, something subtle had shifted, something that would not remain hidden for long. Victoria sat at the long dining table, reviewing documents with her usual precision, her expression composed, though her movements carried a slight rigidity that had not been there before, a quiet irritation she had not yet acknowledged. Lucas entered moments later, his steps measured, his confidence restored by the familiarity of daylight. Yet even he could not fully shake the lingering echo of Emily's final words, the quiet certainty that had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. "She will not come back," he said, more firmly than necessary, as if stating it aloud would make it absolute, and Victoria gave a brief nod, though her attention remained on the papers in front of her, unwilling to entertain doubt. The house staff moved quietly in the background, maintaining the seamless rhythm of service that defined the estate, but even they seemed more careful, more observant, as if sensing that the atmosphere had not fully returned to normal. Then, just after 9 in the morning, the stillness was interrupted. The low hum of engines approached from beyond the gates, unfamiliar in both timing and tone, and one of the staff members paused, glancing toward the entrance as the sound grew clearer, more deliberate. Lucas frowned slightly, setting his glass down as he moved toward the large windows that overlooked the driveway, his expression tightening as a line of black vehicles came into view, their presence controlled, purposeful, not the casual arrival of guests, but something far more intentional. "Are we expecting anyone?" he asked, though the answer was already evident in the silence that followed. Victoria stood, her posture straightening instinctively, her instincts sharpening as she moved to join him, her eyes narrowing slightly as the vehicles came to a precise stop in front of the estate, doors opening in quiet unison. From them stepped individuals dressed in tailored suits, their demeanor professional, their movements efficient, each carrying folders, briefcases, the unmistakable presence of people who had arrived with a purpose that did not require permission. The front door opened before anyone inside could respond. One of the senior staff members standing frozen as the group entered with calm authority, not aggressive, not forceful, but undeniable in their presence. The room seemed to hold its breath as a man in his mid-50s stepped forward, his expression composed, his voice clear and measured. "Good morning," he said, his tone respectful yet firm. "We are here on behalf of the primary owner of this estate." The words landed with quiet weight, and for a brief moment, no one spoke, as if the meaning had not fully settled yet. Lucas let out a short, dismissive breath, attempting to regain control. "There must be some mistake," he said, his voice steady but edged with irritation. "This property belongs to the Carter family." The man did not react to the interruption, did not argue, did not raise his voice. He simply opened the folder in his hand and glanced down briefly before looking back up. "Yes," he replied calmly, "and that ownership is registered under Emily Carter." The room went completely silent, the kind of silence that did not fade, the kind that expanded, pressing into every corner, leaving no space for denial. And in that moment, the foundation of everything they believed they controlled began to shift in a way they could no longer ignore. For a moment, it seemed as though the room itself rejected what had just been said, as if the words could not possibly belong in a space so carefully built on certainty, and yet they lingered, undeniable, impossible to take back. Lucas stared at the man, his expression caught between disbelief and irritation, his mind searching for an explanation that would restore control, but none came. "That is not possible," he said, his voice sharper now, the confidence from the night before beginning to fracture at the edges. "There must be an error in your records." The man did not react to the challenge, did not raise his voice or shift his stance. He simply turned a page within the folder and extended a document forward with steady precision. "The records have been verified multiple times," he replied calmly. "The estate, along with its associated holdings, was transferred under Mrs. Emily Carter's name prior to her marriage, and all subsequent legal structures have remained unchanged." Victoria's hand tightened slightly around the edge of the table, her composure still intact on the surface, but the subtle tension in her posture betrayed the shift happening beneath it, the quiet realization beginning to form. "Transferred," she repeated, her voice measured, controlled, as though repeating the word might change its meaning. The man inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the question without altering his tone. "Yes," he said. "The property was acquired through a private investment group and later consolidated under her personal ownership. All documentation has been filed and recognized at both the state and federal level. The room fell silent again, deeper this time, heavier, as if each word added weight that could not be ignored. Lucas let out a short, disbelieving laugh, though it lacked any real humor. "That is absurd," he said, shaking his head slightly. She would have said something. But even as the words left his mouth, something in his expression shifted, because deep down, he realized that assumption had always been the foundation of how they treated her, not fact, not knowledge, just assumption. Victoria's gaze moved slowly across the documents, her eyes scanning the lines with increasing focus, searching for inconsistency, for weakness, for anything that could restore the order she had always known. But the precision of the paperwork left no room for interpretation, no space for dismissal. "Why was this not disclosed?" she asked finally, her voice quieter now, not demanding, but searching, as if the question itself might anchor her to something familiar. The man paused for a brief moment, not out of uncertainty, but out of careful consideration before answering. "Ownership does not require announcement," he said simply, "and discretion is often preferred in matters of this scale." The words settled into the silence with quiet authority, and for the first time, neither Lucas nor Victoria had an immediate response, because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to challenge. Only the growing awareness that everything they believed they controlled had never truly belonged to them. Outside, another car door closed softly, and footsteps approached, measured, unhurried, and though no one had yet turned to look, something in the air shifted again, subtle but unmistakable, as if the final piece of the truth was about to enter the room, and this time, there would be no room left for denial, no space left for doubt. Only the reality they had refused to see until it stood directly in front of them. The sound of footsteps grew clearer against the polished stone outside, steady and unhurried. Each step carrying a quiet certainty that contrasted sharply with the tension now gripping the room, and without needing to be told, everyone turned toward the entrance as if drawn by something they could not yet name. The doorway framed her silhouette first, simple, composed, unmistakable, and when Emily stepped inside, nothing about her appearance had changed, yet everything about how she was seen had shifted completely. She moved with the same calm presence as the night before, her posture straight, her gaze steady, but this time the room did not overlook her. It could not, because now every eye followed her every step, every movement measured against the truth that had just been revealed. No one spoke. Even Lucas, who only hours earlier had dismissed her without hesitation, found himself frozen in place, his mind racing to reconcile the version of her he thought he knew with the reality now standing in front of him. Victoria remained still, her composure intact on the surface, but her eyes revealed something deeper, a calculation, a reassessment, as if she were trying to understand how she had misread someone so completely. Emily stopped a few feet inside the room, her gaze moving briefly across the familiar space, not with longing, not with resentment, but with a quiet recognition, as though she were observing something that had never truly belonged to anyone else but her. The man with the documents stepped slightly aside, his role complete, his presence now secondary, because the authority he had represented was no longer abstract. It was standing there in human form. Lucas cleared his throat, attempting to regain some measure of control, though the effort was visibly strained. "Emily," he began, his tone uncertain for the first time, "there has been some kind of misunderstanding." The words felt hollow even as he said them, and the room seemed to recognize it immediately. Emily did not respond right away. She simply looked at him, her expression calm, her eyes steady, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make the imbalance undeniable. "There is no misunderstanding," she said finally, her voice even, not raised, not emotional, just clear. The simplicity of her tone carried more weight than any argument could have. Victoria stepped forward then, her voice controlled, but softer than before, no longer edged with superiority, but with something closer to caution. "Why did you not say anything?" she asked, her question direct, but lacking the authority it once held. Emily's gaze shifted to her, and for a moment, the room held its breath again. "Because you never asked," she replied, the answer quiet, but absolute. The words settled over them like a realization that could not be undone, exposing not just a mistake, but a pattern, a way of seeing that had blinded them long before this moment. Lucas's hand tightened slightly at his side, his earlier confidence replaced with something far less stable. "This is still our family home," he said, though the conviction in his voice had faded, replaced by uncertainty he could not hide. Emily regarded him for a moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with a calm understanding that made the difference between them unmistakable. "It has always been mine," she said, her tone unchanged, her presence unwavering. And as those words settled into the silence, no one in that room had the power to challenge them, because for the first time, the truth was not hidden, not implied, but standing clearly in front of them, impossible to ignore, impossible to dismiss, and the room that once felt so certain of its hierarchy now had nothing left to say. The silence did not break, it deepened, settling over the room with a weight that no one could escape, because the truth no longer needed to be explained. It was already understood, already accepted in the stillness that followed Emily's words. Victoria's posture remained upright, but the certainty that once defined her presence had shifted into something more fragile, something measured, as though every decision she made from this point forward carried consequences she could no longer control. Lucas looked around the room, as if searching for support, for someone to challenge what had just been said, but no one stepped forward, no one spoke, because the authority he once relied on had quietly dissolved. Emily did not raise her voice, did not demand acknowledgement. She simply stood there, her calm presence reshaping the space without effort, without force, and that absence of aggression made her position even more undeniable. The man who had delivered the documents stepped forward once more, his role not finished yet, his voice steady as he addressed the room with professional clarity. "As of this morning," he said, "all operational control of this property and its associated assets will be exercised directly under Mrs. Emily Carter's direction." The words were precise, final, leaving no room for interpretation. A faint shift moved through the staff, subtle but noticeable. As their posture adjusted, their attention no longer divided, but aligned, instinctively recognizing where authority now resided. Victorious gaze moved slowly across the room, taking in the change, the way even those who had once followed her lead now hesitated, uncertain, recalibrating their understanding of the hierarchy that had just been rewritten. "This is unnecessary," she said finally, her voice controlled, though no longer absolute. "We can resolve this privately." Emily's eyes met hers, steady, composed, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of everything that had led to this point. "It was already handled privately," Emily replied, her tone calm, her words simple, yet carrying a finality that could not be undone. Lucas took a step forward, his frustration rising, though tempered now by the reality he could not deny. "You are overreacting," he said, his voice tight. "Last night was a misunderstanding." Emily regarded him quietly, her expression unchanged, and in that stillness, the weight of his words seemed to fade on their own. "You made your position clear," she said, her voice even, "and I respected it." The response was not confrontational, not emotional, but it carried a clarity that left no space for argument. The room remained silent again, not out of shock this time, but out of recognition, because what had once been dismissed as insignificant had now become undeniable truth. Emily turned slightly, her gaze moving toward the windows, the morning light stretching across the estate she had never needed to claim, because it had always been hers. "You said I did not belong here," she continued, her voice soft, but steady. "So I left." A pause followed, quiet but deliberate. "Now I am asking you to do the same." The words did not echo, they settled, calm and absolute, leaving no room for misinterpretation, no space for resistance. Only the realization that the roles they had assumed were never theirs to begin with. And in that moment, the house no longer felt like a place of power for the Carter family, but a space that had finally revealed who truly held it all. No one moved at first, because movement would have meant acceptance, and acceptance was the one thing the Carter family had never learned to offer without resistance. Yet now it stood in front of them, quiet and unavoidable. Victoria's fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table, her posture still composed, but her silence spoke louder than any command she had ever given, because for the first time, she had nothing left to assert, nothing left to correct. Only the realization that authority without awareness had led her to misjudge the one person she should have understood. Lucas exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly. The tension that once fueled his certainty now replaced with something far less stable, something closer to reflection, though he would never name it that. Around them, the staff remained still, attentive, but no longer uncertain, their roles already adjusting in subtle ways that did not require instruction, because power, once revealed, did not need to announce itself again. Emily stood where she was, not advancing, not retreating, her presence steady, grounded, as though she had already said everything that needed to be said, and in truth, she had. The morning light continued to stretch across the room, illuminating the same marble floors, the same high ceilings, the same carefully curated space that had once defined status and control, yet now it felt different, not because the structure had changed, but because the truth within it had finally been seen. Victoria's gaze lifted slowly, meeting Emily's once more, and for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, not agreement, not reconciliation, but understanding, the kind that comes too late to undo what has already been done. She nodded once, barely perceptible, but enough to acknowledge what could no longer be denied. Lucas turned slightly, his eyes moving toward the windows, avoiding the center of the room, avoiding the weight of what had just unfolded, as though distance might soften its impact, though it did not. One by one, the guests who had remained from the previous night began to gather their things, their movements quiet, respectful, no longer driven by curiosity, but by the recognition that they had witnessed something final, something that did not belong to them to question. Emily took a slow breath, her gaze drifting across the space one last time, not with possession, not with triumph, but with clarity, the kind that does not need validation. "This house will remain as it is," she said calmly, her voice steady, measured, "but the way it is treated will change." No one interrupted, no one challenged her, because there was nothing left to contest. She turned then, not to leave, but to walk further inside, her steps unhurried, natural, as though she had always belonged exactly where she was, because she had. And behind her, the room remained silent, not out of shock this time, but out of recognition, because in that moment, everyone present understood something they had overlooked for far too long, that dignity is not something granted by others. It is revealed through how one carries it when everything else is taken away. And that day, in the quiet stillness of that house, respect was not demanded, it was finally understood.